Our young people today are facing a terrible distraction. Everywhere they go, they are faced with products that draw their attention away from those around them. These products are marketed to them heavily in stores, in malls, in supermarkets. You may have seen one of these products today. You might have one with you right now. These products, unfortunately, now are even being sold in schools, and students are required to carry them with them at all times. And the products that I am talking about, of course, are books, right? These novels, students keep reading all the time. They won't stop. Hunger Games, Harry Potter, we can't stop the reading. All the time, reading, reading, reading. I just had a student, and this is true, I had a student yesterday pull a 1,000-page novel out of his backpack that he is reading. I did not assign this novel. This is something that he's reading entirely on his own. Now, it sounds ridiculous to say that novels pose some kind of imminent danger to society, but 200 years ago, this was precisely the conversation that was happening. Novels had become more accessible, more affordable, paper was cheaper, they were being published in magazines, and you had an entirely literate generation that had access to literature like never before. And all of a sudden, this was a problem. What are all these people doing with their time? Well, they're reading novels. We must stop this immediately, right? But the rhetoric that I used at the beginning probably sounded strikingly familiar. It probably sounded a lot like the blog post I read the other day that said that video games are more addictive than illegal drugs. And my argument today is that if we can survive the popularity of novels in the 1850s, we will be able to survive the popularity of technology in the 21st century. And that just as ridiculous as it sounds to us today to say that novels pose some imminent danger, it will sound equally ridiculous 80 years from now to say that video games pose some kind of imminent danger. And why is that? Well, what are video games? At their core, what they do is very similar to what novels do. They tell a story. They present a narrative, admittedly in a very new and unusual way, but it is a narrative nonetheless. Now, when we think about video games and narrative, we can come up against a lot of big theoretical words. But what we need, and what our students need, is a foundation for thinking about storytelling in a world of technology. And the way that they're going to arrive at that foundation is not by being told to turn off their technology at every turn. What they need are tools to understand that technology. So what I'm going to do today is focus on 3 of these terms and describe to you the ways that I think video games actually can function as a unique form of art in the 21st century, and one with which our students need to learn how to engage. Now, when we talk about interactive fiction, which is the first kind of video game I want to discuss, what we're really thinking about here is an interactivity that uses text as the primary delivery mechanism for the story that the game is telling. The game that you see here is called Sunless Sea. I used this in a nautical fiction class. And in Sunless Sea, you play a steamship captain who sails around from island to island, discovering new civilizations, new cultures. And as you do, at each port that you land at, this book opens up. And in this book, you get the story of that particular location. And as the player of the game, you can decide what happens next. So this book will present to you some options, some decisions that you can make. Now, if you look at the way that Sunless Sea is designed, you'll see that it has what is called a skeuomorphic design aesthetic. And what that basically means is that it uses the book, that invention that was so dangerous 200 years ago, it uses the book as the visual frame for the story that it tells. But technology doesn't require us to use that kind of design aesthetic. Another form of interactive fiction comes from Simogo. It's a Swedish developer. They gave us Device 6 and several other very interesting games that were designed specifically for iOS devices, touchscreens. In Device 6, what actually happens is that you have a text game in which you scroll through the words. And as you do, the text moves across the page in a way that is not possible to replicate in a book. You could try. It might be possible to have text turn and look in different directions, but it wouldn't work quite as well. Here is a game that is offering us a way to read a story that is completely unique. You cannot do this in any other medium. You cannot tell the story of this character in the way that it is told, so that as the character chooses which direction she will take in the location in which she finds herself, you must turn your device and rotate the words on the screen to read them. Now, not all video games have a story baked into them. Some games provide more of a structure, a framework through which you can understand and create narrative. The narrative emerges from the way that you play the game. This is why we call it emergent narrative. It's something that happens as part of the process of playing the game. Marina Abramovich is a very famous performance artist. Several years ago, she gave a very well-known retrospective exhibit called The Artist is Present, in which several of her performance art pieces were put on display. The centerpiece of this exhibit was Marina Abramovich herself sitting in the center of an exhibit hall behind a table and a bright red dress, and people would line up and wait for hours and hours simply to sit across from the artist and look into her face. And you could sit for as long as you wanted, and people had incredibly emotional experiences. Now, Pippin Barr is an experimental game maker and researcher, and he contacted the artist of The Artist is Present and said, I think we could make this into a video game. What do you do in this video game? Well, I will tell you. You go in as a digital character and you wait in line. And that is all that you do. And in the class in which I taught this game, my students read several articles about the exhibit, and then they came to class and we put Pippin Barr's game on the screen. And immediately my students said, well, this is ridiculous. This is not a game. This can't be a game. There's no way that you can make a game in which all you do is stand in line. That's not, we do not like this. This does not make any sense to us. I'm like, okay, fine. Very well. You don't like it. At that moment, my co-teacher, whether purposefully or not, I may never know, hit the down arrow on the keyboard and moved our little digital man out of the line. Unbeknownst to us, what happens when you do that is that all of the other little digital characters behind you, you're out of line now, and they scoot forward. And now you have lost your place forever. Immediate uproar. The entire class was furious that we had lost our place in line. They could not believe it. How could you do this? We have lost our place in the fake digital line. Now that is a story that I can tell you that really happened in a classroom at the University of Florida in 2012, and Pippin Barr did not create that story. That story was made possible by Pippin Barr because he gave us a structure around which a narrative experience was allowed to develop. It emerged from what he created, but it was not exactly itself what he made. And the final kind of video game storytelling that I want to talk about today is the playable story. Many of my students who are here today will remember that we did this last year. This is something that my students enjoy. This is a game called Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Assassin's Creed is a very well-known video game series. And in Assassin's Creed, you play through several different historical periods, depending on which game in the series you happen to be playing at that point. And the reason that I call it a playable story is because the game rewards you based on how well your gameplay matches the predetermined, pre-scripted narrative structure that the game has put in place. But what I like about Assassin's Creed is the fact that it provides a simulation of London in the 1860s. Now, I teach English, and that means that I actually do love books, and I love stories, and I want my students to read them. But it also means that the London that they read about in the stories and novels that I assign does not exist anymore. It has been through the Blitz. It has been through countless reconstructions, new buildings. So what we can do in Assassin's Creed is travel back in time and find some of those buildings in a state that much more aligns to the state that they would have existed in the time that the novels were written that we are reading. And so my students go on a scavenger hunt, and they have to find 15 historic buildings, and then they have to post on our forum page about what they have discovered about some of those buildings. And that is a chance to interact with a certain kind of simulation that you do not get when you read a description of the London of the 1860s in a book. It supplements the reading, sure, but it offers us a kind of experience that we don't get without digital technology. Now, the last game that I'm going to talk to you about today is one that I reviewed a few years ago, and it's called That Dragon Cancer. And this game is based on a true story about a young boy named Joel Green who was diagnosed with cancer at a very young age. And his parents had to experience the tragedy and the horror of finding doctors, finding new doctors, of finding treatments, of going to different hospitals. And through this experience, they realized that they wanted to share this story with others. And the way that they did it was creating a video game. It's a video game in which you step into the shoes of these parents. The particular image that you're looking at here involves us stepping into the shoes of Joel's father as he attempts to comfort his son, racked with pain, through a sleepless night. And that is something that Joel's parents could have decided to commission a painting. They could have made a film. They could have written a poem. But when you stand in that hospital room, looking into the eyes of that boy and hearing his cries, unable to figure out what you can do to make him feel better, that is something that you cannot get from any other medium. So what do we do? Well, one of the greatest compliments that one of my students ever paid me, at the end of the class, the student said, "You, sir, have ruined video games for me forever." And I said, "Good. That's what I want." And the reason that I want that came next, because the next thing that this student said was, now I have to think about every game that I play. Why can't I just be a passive consumer like I once was? Why can't I be an unthinking gamer? We don't need unthinking gamers. We need thinking gamers. Because those are the kind of people who use technology with wisdom and critical awareness, understanding that the stories that we tell today on our screens may very well be the classics that are taught in our classrooms tomorrow. Thank you very much.